Clock Tower is the kind of game you probably don't know how much you appreciate, even if you've never heard of it. While Resident Evil and Silent Hill tend to get all the credit for survival horror's popularity, Clock Tower is an integral, if obscure, contributor to establishing the tropes of the genre. This is partly because Clock Tower was never officially released outside of Japan, and if not for fan translations and emulation, which I know nothing about, Nintendo, us Westerners would probably be alone in the dark on this one.
I'm alone in the dark.
So it's a bit of a rare vintage and an acquired taste, being a point-and-click game with no combat, two characteristics that made the higher-ups at developer Human very nervous as to its selling power. But Clock Tower defied all expectations and sold rather well, and while it generated worse and worse received sequels, it got 3 of them, which is more than most series get, so it's not too shabby. Part of the series' appeal is that while Resident Evil appeals to zombie movie fans, Clock Tower leans fully the other direction into the more idiosyncratic and lesser plumbed depths of slasher films and movies obsessed with the demon possessed like The Exorcist and The Omen. And thank God it did, because Clock Tower would become, as director and creator Hifumei Kono sheepishly admitted, epoch-making. So in the year 2025, marking the 30th anniversary of the game that time nearly forgot, let's figure out what the fuck epoch means, and also celebrate the unsung and often unrung belle of the survival horror ball, that is, the original Clock Tower. First things first, let's put a name and face together for the clockmaker himself, director Hifumei Kono. Kono went to college to become an accountant. Nerd. Where he watched many a cool horror movie. Cool. And avidly played strategy board games. Nerd. Even creating his own Yakuza-themed card game that was a hit on campus. Oh, okay, that's pretty cool. As he told Retro Gamer,
"That was when I realised the joy of having so many people play something I had created. I believe this experience was the catalyst for me to dive into the world of video games."
Kono had dabbled in basic coding before, and he soon began to prefer video games as a creative space because they only required one player to be fun, unlike most board games. So he sent out his resume to a curated list of preferred game developers to start a new career path. Only Human got back to him, and thus started a new chapter for Kono. When he arrived on the scene, Kono noticed that Human had an unusual but stimulating company culture. Because all the artists were grouped in one place, all the programmers in another, and so on, a sort of competitive tribalism arose where each department thought they were the best. This spirit of outspokenness and competition eventually became a petition for the company to move away from all the sports games that Human made, like Kono's first directing job, Human Grand Prix 2, and instead do something more experimental, more interesting. So the executives at Human said, sure, go ahead, pitch us your ideas, but whichever one wins, it'll go into full production. The submissions were sent in, and Kono's came out on top. Kono's pitch probably went over pretty well because he intentionally leaned into several familiar aspects from Human's existing catalog in the sinking ship survival game Septentrion or SOS, and also their game The Fireman. But the secret sauce would come from Kono's great passion for horror movies and innovative, unusual game mechanics.
Originally, when I would come up with an idea for a project, I would often break down the structure of the film, the anime, or novel that I liked. I would then extract what I found interesting, why, and then structure it out. All of the game designs are based on series of logical steps, so my purpose is pretty much solidified at the proposal stage. So when I created Clock Tower, I drew from what fascinated me about horror films like Pneumonia,
What the fuck?
Pneumonia, and Suspiria. The suspense of being chased and the thrill of hiding from a killer while holding your own breath. Neither of these aspects existed in video games at the time, and that's why I felt it was worth depicting them.
Like the movies that inspired it, Clock Tower features a young, presumably American girl named Jennifer, who is named and modeled after Jennifer Corvino from Phenomena, who is played by Jennifer Connelly, the most mesmerizing actress ever put to screen. How's that for Genception? Much like the setups of Suspiria and Phenomena, Jennifer and her orphan friends travel out into the Scandinavian mountains to a remote abode, this time the Clock Tower Mansion, owned by the reclusive Simon Barrows, the orphan's new adoptive father. Their governess of a sort, Miss Mary, promises that they'll love their new life here, and so she leaves the girls to chat amongst themselves while their quarters are prepared. But some time passes, and the group begins to wonder where Miss Mary has gotten to, so Jennifer takes it upon herself to go searching, elevating her immediately to the role of the final girl, the one with no special ability except extra willpower and perception and the drive to discover what's going on. It doesn't take long for things to go sideways. Literally, like side to side. Okay, I'll cut it out. I lied. Scissor Man will cut it out. Clock Tower is a game of atmosphere and ebb and flow, but it starts off with a bang. Bobby Barrows, or Scissor Man as he's more commonly called, is one of survival horror's first iconic villains. He's a lively pastiche of Patow, the murderous child of Assault from Phenomena, and the shear-wielding maniac Cropsy from The Burning, and a much lesser-known reference in God's Left Hand, Devil's Right Hand, The Rusted Scissors by Kazuo Umezu. He's a gleefully wretched little thing, and his appearances are panic-inducing as you're controlling Jennifer with a point-and-click interface, and her running has momentum to it that you need to control, not to mention you can't fight back, like, almost at all. Which brings us to the central hook of Clock Tower. Kono was confident in his game's concept, but as he told Retro Gamer,
there was only one problem. Outside of the text adventure genre, the idea of not being able to attack or defeat your enemies was a very foreign concept for games back then.
Especially considering that id Software had taken the world by storm with the 1-2 punch of Wolfenstein in 1992 and then of course Doom in 1993 that had competitors like Alone in the Dark 2 scrambling to chase action trends. Clock Tower in 1995 was almost defiantly archaic. Kono credits the first Alone in the Dark by Infogram for prototyping a game where the protagonist is extremely weak and the enemies have abnormal strength. But unlike Alone in the Dark, where you could fight back with weapons, Jennifer has no real physical capabilities, and her ability to fight back is hampered further by the player's ability to run from real-time dangers with awkward cursor controls on a controller's D-pad of all things.
I didn't think my first attempt at a game would be a match for Alone in the Dark. The planning team learned about numerous point-and-click games, and it became clear that the genre's mechanics were present in more Western games compared to Japanese games. There was a significant amount of opposition to using a point-and-click system during the planning stage, with worries that it couldn't be used for a particularly interesting game.
And now at first I was worried that my own setup using a controller would be an inauthentic experience to the mouse and keyboard point-and-click adventure that I expected. But then I realized that, Clock Tower's original release actually used the SNES controller D-pad to awkwardly move its cursor around, not the mouse. Turns out that the budget was actually too tight to develop the controls for the mouse peripheral, and Human had no 3D artist to even make spaces that required anything more complex anyway. And what's more, hardly anyone owned that mouse, so it wasn't worth doing in the first place. Matthew Weiss, who is known for those excellent Looking Glass studio interviews that I referenced back in my System Shock series, pointed out in his essay, The Rules of Horror, why this unconventional and possibly even dubious point-and-click control scheme actually works really well in Clock Tower's favor as a survival horror simulation.
One moment the player is moving about slowly, trying to solve a puzzle, and the next, they are forced to run for their lives, using controls not designed for action. This sudden oscillation between two gameplay styles is at the heart of Clock Tower's strategy for building tension. The player never knows when the gameplay mechanics will switch on them, forcing them to think in a different mode. For players familiar with point-and-click adventure games, there is an additional dimension, since the sudden demand on reflexes seems transgressive, a betrayal of genre expectations. Jennifer isn't in an action game, one might protest, so it's not fair that she is pitted against an unstoppable killer. But that's precisely the point. It's not fair. Jennifer is not a space marine. She is a teenage girl who can't fight and has to rely completely on her wits. That is the challenge and the promise of the Stalker simulation.
But beyond a smart use of an unconventional control scheme to induce tension, Kono's greatest innovation was making Jennifer's health a reflection of her physical and mental state, the ultimate feeling of being in a slasher film. Jennifer loses health the more she runs, even if she's outside of a chase encounter, so you can be caught depleted and unable to even shove Scissor Man aside if your health is too low, as evidenced by the reddening of your character portrait. You have to hammer a panic button like a QuickTime event to shove him back, and sometimes your panic state will cause Jennifer to trip and fall as she makes her escape. Even if she makes it to her hiding place, she might have startled a parrot that gives away her hiding position, unless she acts fast, or she might have to fend off a hand attacking her through a mirror. While I was surprised I only seemed to die once based on low health concerns, and I only tripped and fell maybe twice, I appreciated the spirit of these mechanics because they work so well conceptually to marry action and emotion into an intuitive and tangible resource, much like later games would in Eternal Darkness, Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth, and Amnesia the Dark Descent. But as good as those moments are, and as rich of a legacy as they have left, they're crescendos, not the common rhythm of the game. As Kono said in the Terabytes documentary, anticipation is the worst part of a horror experience, or the best part, I guess, depending on who you ask. But to achieve that feeling of slow, creeping dread exploding into a frenzied chase, there had to be downtime that built up this dread. Kono explained to Games Radar that
It's true for all games, but I think especially important for survival horror titles. Those games are fast-paced when you're being chased or fighting monsters, but if they continue without letting up, then the player will grow numb to it. That makes the monsters, which should be the focus of the fear, becoming mere obstacles. To mitigate this as best possible and keep the monsters terrifying, you pace things out in waves by periodically having a quiet, slow-paced situation. The most important thing for me was the stillness. Nothing happening, just walking down the hallways in complete silence. The only sound you hear the echo of a footstep. In creating those moments of stillness, I think I succeeded in making the appearance of Scissor Man and the fear of the sound of his scissors more effective. Mr. Koji Nakura was in charge of the sound direction, and he really demonstrated his superb skills in an extremely important facet of the game.
And as good as Nikura's score is when you can't hear it, it's also masterful in its restraint and how much you miss it when there's complete silence. When first given its marching orders as to how to score the game, Kono gave Nikura a CD from Goblin, Dario Argento's frequent collaborator who scored Phenomena and Suspiria.
Phenomena's crashing, metallic music left me uncertain about it, however, and it didn't end up being much of a useful influence.
And that's just the part that Goblin made, not the horrendously out-of-place Iron Maiden and Motorhead songs that are in that movie.
Yes, Phenomena wasn't much of an inspiration in the music department. Despite this, I did wish for Goblin's music from another film, Suspiria.
I think the main theme of Suspiria was very well done. I felt the same about the theme used for The Exorcist, Tubular Bells. When it comes to horror films, those themes are some of the first to come to mind, so I thought that we should aim for that kind of thing. The first theme that I worked on was the main theme. By focusing on making that as good as possible at first, the later work would fall into place much more easily.
And so it did. And while some may misconstrue his work as being lesser simply because it aims primarily for homage rather than innovation, you do well to respect his excellent ear for sound effects, the shing-shing of the Scissor Man shears, or the Friday the 13th echo stinger when he appears, or Jennifer's iconic scream that sounds almost ominously muted before it can finish. It's delicious. Okay, so that's how the game works conceptually, from its stillness to its intentionally wacky controls to its innovative health mechanics and needing to hide from Scissor Dude, but it's overall a fairly simple game. You walk or run from one side of the screen to the other, typically along hallways, clicking on every door you see, and then going inside and clicking on anything and everything you see in hopes of jarring some means of progression loose, and then you likely have to backtrack down these halls to do the same thing again. Sometimes Scissor Man will jump out at you, but it's almost always at a predetermined place, or one of a couple different options in a place. So unless you've triggered a chase by clicking on something specific, you pretty much know you're safe. So while I appreciated the individual aspects of Clock Tower, they didn't always come together in a complementary way, and so I had to kind of appreciate these in isolation. Let me explain. One of the aspects of the game I think is the most laudable is its layout. The Clock Tower or Barrow's Mansion is set up like it's 3D, which is really strange for a game that you only interact with two-dimensionally. You've often heard me praise games that do a good job of helping you memorize a layout, but this is not one of them. On my playthrough, for instance, 2 passages collapsed behind me, so I couldn't go back the way I came, and that meant I had to find the single hallway that took me from the east wing to the west wing, which are the 2 major demarcations that you'll need to know in order to finish the game. Even upstairs and downstairs are cordoned off from each other and don't connect because the right side of the foyer second stories are all dead ends for some reason, and no other pathway leads to another area, only offering top or bottom to the existing area you're already in. It's really weird, and it's kind of confusing, and it's apparently this way because the game remixes elements happens every time you start a new game, like a game of Clue. From whether certain chases trigger, like whether Scissorman's gonna come out from behind the curtain or jump down on the piano in the music room, to how some rooms switch places in the mansion, to whether even certain main items spawn in that will determine how you have to finish the game. It's a bold choice to put up bumpers around progression like this, but it is interesting, and there's definitely an incentive to replay and see what the game will do next, or how many permutations you can find. It makes following walkthroughs a real nightmare if you're stuck and have overlooked a hallway or a door 100 times because it looks like every other one, but it makes for some pretty cool water cooler stories if you can finally break through and realize that you had an appreciably different set of events happen to you than your friends. I know when I first booted up the PS1 First Fear version, I went straight into the foyer after I heard the scream, and Scissorman crashes into the skylight all Suspiria style and chases me. I died immediately. On the SNES version though, I went to the other side of the manor first, so this triggered him elsewhere behind the curtain, and he never appeared in the foyer no matter how many times I went through. There's even a whole courtyard and shed that I didn't get to see because of the remix I first played at the SNES. It's this shifting sands design that proved to be the most interesting part of Clock Tower to me. Now, I'm probably spoiled rotten by how modern Clock Tower stalker enemy actually feels, not realizing how outrageously good this would have felt in 1995, but I have to be honest, my 2025 eyes really think that reshuffling ideas here is really clever, and it's a smart way to extend the replayability of what is a fairly straightforward game and quite a short one, outside of having to backtrack for several hours if you're stuck. So the real fun starts with how the game drip feeds you secrets to its increasingly horrific mysteries and its awesome ending sequence. So without further ado, let's unpack the branching pathways of Clock Tower and all the cool opportunities for scares and intrigue that they make for. This is your big ol' spoiler warning. Skip to the timestamp on screen if you want my final impressions. Clock Tower is one of the very first games of its kind to have multiple endings and quite a few of them, about 8 to 10 in all, including 2 glitch endings. Most impressive is how many ways to trigger them there are, how many permutations exist, and how many different requirements they each have. You often won't know you're getting any different kind of ending because items sometimes spawn for you or they don't, locking you into a specific way to beat the game on this particular playthrough. For instance, there are 2 possible ways to win the game, one using the scepter and the other using the demon statue. Sometimes the scepter won't be behind the curtain in the music room, Scissor Man will be, like he was for me. And so you've got to go to the library and find the clue that tells you where the other game-winning item is in the demon statue, nestled in the crook of a sculptured lady's arm upstairs. But while there's a fair few outcomes, how you get to them is actually far more interesting. Generally speaking, your journey will involve finding a key to the West Wing, either from a bird's nest or atop a box in a different room, then finding the phone room, and then the ritual room from where the finale starts. The poisoning that can take place in the phone room or the kitchen is a big dividing line between whether you actually figure out much of the game's backstory, which is a delicious mashup of The Omen, The Exorcist, Phenomena, and Suspiria. In one path, if you go to the phone room before finding the hidden room, you find Miss Mary and she comforts you and tells you to drink something that'll calm you down. Unfortunately, it's actually full of Belle Delphine's bathwater, so you promptly pass out, waking up in a cell next to none other than Simon Barrows, the owner of this house? Uh-oh. The dude is half a werewolf, which would normally be cool, but unless you manage to secure some ham from the kitchen, he will eat Jennifer like she's Little Red Running Hood. If you do have the ham, it'll sate his hunger for the moment, and he'll mutter something about the cradle under the stars and being watched from there, which makes about as much sense as Mushu Fossa speaking cryptically about the stars above in Kung Pao.
I don't understand.
Of course you don't. I'm speaking in riddles. That's kind of the point, like a clue that would later make you go, oh, that's what he meant. Stars above.
Then what happens next in some permutations is our fellow orphan pal Lottie runs in like she's new to this planet and helps us escape. Unfortunately, she's not the final girl, so she goes the way of Barb in Stranger Things, a likable redhead that's gone too soon, this time at the hands of Miss Mary quite contrary. Jennifer knocks her out and escapes back into the manor, which is good, but this sequence of events is incredibly cryptic and provides almost no lore background into why this is happening. A bold choice to be sure by Kono and the rest of the human team, but I can't say I want to leave my audience in the dark that hard, especially considering all the cool stuff I got to see and know in my run. I didn't find the phone room first, but instead found the hidden room where a corpse and some documents lay. The documents are medical charts with Miss Mary and Simon Barrow's name on them, as well as 2 newborn babies' names. The corpse nearby is holding a note in its hand, a note belonging to none other than Dr. Walter Simpson, Jennifer's long-dead father. He was kept in here after delivering the 2 babies which belonged to Mary and Simon, who were actually the parents, not platonic co-workers after all. The two babies turn out to be evil monsters, a blemish on this world as he calls them. Only Jennifer's father Walter saw them for what they were, even wishing he could have done the unthinkable. And so he was imprisoned and left to die after his usefulness was up. And now because we don't trust Mary knowing that she's evil, we also can't be drugged, so the whole courtyard and shed scene despawns. So we never know that he's basically being kept in there and fed raw meat, probably like Bruckner does with Patel and Phenomena. But we do know a much more vile truth of the situation, and it's only going to get worse. Once we acquire the demon statue or the scepter, we're able to unlock the secret trapdoor in the demon summoning room and travel down to the caves beneath the manor. We solve a very esoteric puzzle where somehow we were supposed to know that we needed perfume from the bedroom upstairs and to couple it with a black robe so that we can pass the guard dog looking like and smelling like Miss Mary. Beyond, I saw my poor friend Lottie again. Further on, we see the risible horror that has been influencing most of the horrible events here indirectly but powerfully. This is the cradle under the star, the bedchamber of the demon child Dan Barrows, the brother of Bobby Barrows, the Scissor Man, or Scissor Boy if we're being technically correct.
The best kind of correct.
I adore this reveal. Not only does it feel very much like the blood-curdling reveal of the sleeping witch behind the curtain in Suspiria, it also reminds me of the ending of Midnight Meat Train. I've always found this trope of an unimaginable, insatiable evil being fed the bodies of the dead to be one of the most effectively despicable villain types. And then, not unlike the big baby from Resident Evil Village, which isn't the only clock tower reference that game makes, the enraged little monster toddler pursues us with mouth agape, and Jennifer has to scramble through the cave waters to get back up, knocking the conveniently placed explosives and candles down onto the beastly baby and erupting it into a pyre of rightful vengeance. Then Jennifer has to sprint away as the caves start to come down around her, and the elevator is her only escape. There are a fair few outcomes here, as choosing one floor can get you killed by Scissor Man right out, although I thankfully avoided this problem by going to the top floor, as one would assume that they needed to get to in order to get to the top of a clock tower. Other permutations are triggered by whether you rescued animals like the crows or the parrot or the rats, and these will have Miss Mary showing up in the hallway knife in hand like Norman Bates in Psycho and chasing you up the outside ladder of the clock tower as it's raining, which is a pretty amazing sight. But generally speaking, most of the endings revolve around you making your way to the top of the tower from the inside to the outside to enact what the game clue calls time will cause adherence, which no matter how much people localize doesn't make a ton of sense with the information given. Just poking around, I think there's a lot more dedicated lore in the sequels as to the power of the clock tower and the demon worship here, so perhaps we'll get a little bit better understanding of what this means when we talk about the sequels. This apparently is just a way to cause the clock tower to start turning its gear and gonging Scissor Bob Square Britches so hard that he falls to his death like he's Venom or something. In my ending, Miss Mary makes it up here and Jennifer manages to throw her into the circuitry for a shocking end to the Barrows family menace. My favorite versions of this ending, though, are when Miss Mary attacks you one last time and then a murder of crows shows up, presumably the ones you freed, and they live up to their name and they murder Miss Mary like Jennifer Corvino does flies at the end of Phenomena. It's really metal. And while my ending was powerful as Jennifer stood there atop the tower in the rain, solemnly victorious, I actually much prefer the one where you stand alongside one of your friends whom you saved. Although I'm finding out that the second Clock Tower game actually makes this ending non-canon, so more on that later. Either way though, I have some thoughts about these endings and the game proper. I'm going to be honest, I like Clock Tower just fine as a newcomer and as a first-timer, but there's not much to it when all is said and done. As Alistair Pensoff of Destructoid said,
"As an adventure game, Clock Tower isn't very interesting. The mansion's layout is confusing, puzzles are simple, and you'll need to pixel hunt more than once."
Like, for instance, the reason I missed that perfume up in the bedroom the first time is because the actual activation marker for that drawer with the perfume in it is very hard to notice and make the icon come up for. I'll also add that puzzle pieces are sometimes quite misleadingly communicated to the player as to what's activating said puzzle pieces so that the next scripted event can happen. For instance, I went into the ritual room to open up the passageway down to the caves below, but because I hadn't found the religious studies room to view a painting, Jennifer didn't have the context that she needed to do the next thing. So I had to go find this room. Of course, it was one of the rooms that can move around in your playthrough, so it was a bit of a pain to find. But even once I got there, I found out that my particular WinCon didn't allow me to move aside the shelf so that I could see the full painting. And yet, I still needed to be in the room and click on everything I could before I initiated the statue back in the ritual room. Now maybe it's possible I could have just put the statue on the altar without having to trigger Jennifer's observation that this was just like the painting, so she'd know what to do. As I've been trying to fit the statue into the hole in the summoning circle, which is the text that I kept getting, saying that there was something that could be slotted in there. I kept trying to no avail, and when I came back the second time, I put the statue on the altar per a walkthrough, despite the game giving me no clickable place to put it via one of the little boxes that usually appears, nor any context clues when I clicked on the book already on there that this was what the game wanted me to do, or even what was possible. Times like this where I just have to kind of grin and shake my head and say, yeah, this is just like a point-and-click game. I'll also point out that as neat and ahead of their time as the chase sequences are, they're pretty much only triggering from a couple different spots. Scissor Man rarely ever comes to you out of the blue. In fact, in my 4 hours or so of game time, he only showed up in the hallways, seemingly of his own accord, one time, causing me to have to, use the stop button, turn on a dime, and run the other direction. Which is cool, but it just rarely ever came up. It was like he was always in a monster closet somewhere waiting to be triggered. So while the contrast may be striking between different playthroughs, on the playthrough that you're on, it's not nearly as panic-inducing as you might think. It's also a little strange too for a game that's so much about hide and seek. I actually never officially hid from Scissor Man once in my playthrough. The hiding spots are quite few and far between as it is, and the mansion looks so similar the whole way through, it's hard to remember where they are. So I got away with one time just outlasting him, no pun intended, by running away until the danger music stopped. Then 2 other times I found to my great surprise and glee that I could run across the plank and pull it up as he followed me across, so that he'd fall through the open crack and down to the first floor, losing him for the time being, which was pretty great.
Gotcha, bitch!
I do have to give credit to the game, though, for the unnerving moments like the toy room where the doll comes to life and you have to fend her off to leave with your head still attached. It reminded me a bit of that doll scene in Resident Evil Village's House Beneviento, to be honest. There's a fun nod to Phenomena's insects in the kitchen where you have to pesticide them away to get to a key at the back. The ritual room reeks of evil, and the ending sequence is deliciously unhinged, full of pulse-pounding excitement and big ideas. Literally. I love how full throttle everything gets by the end, and the lore starts to really come to life and make me want more. But I do find it interesting how the end sequence is super straightforward and almost entirely linear, with just a couple QuickTime events where you have to hammer the button to stop panicking. As much as gamers whine about the prevalence of these kind of endings with games like The Last Bosses and Dying Light or Halo 4 or Far Cry 3, this sort of uninteractive scripted stuff has been in games since 1995 apparently, and even technically in 1989 Sweet Home if you'll remember in my last video. It's very cinematic and fun to watch, but it's almost entirely watching, which I found rather strange in a game that's been trying to simulate the moment-to-moment stress and need for reflexes as a slasher film does. If it weren't so damn cool looking, I'd probably be a little bit more unimpressed. But maybe I was just kind of glad to be past the endless backtracking, the languid pace, and the almost entire lack of sound effects. I've heard this game is really scary for the time, but I found a lot of it to be frankly kind of boring, not building up dread but causing my mind to wander. That's not to say that Clock Tower isn't quite the accomplishment, though. The animations are really wonderful, the sound design when present is stellar, some of the environments are well detailed, and the SNES version especially has rather pretty colors. The game feels aesthetically connected to its tone and theme, almost timeless in how it intertwines antiquity and modernity. I'm also probably spoiled by how mostly modern the Stalker Scissor Man feels that I can't quite appreciate how innovative this would feel for 1995. And for a game that used a weird point-and-click interface with a controller, an unusual amount of silence for effect, and a brand new vision of the Stalker simulation, I'd say Hifumei Kono and friends can hang their heads pretty high. Kono confirms this impression to be true in his interview with Games Radar.
The leadership system with directors and team members wasn't clearly established at Human Entertainment back then, making it unclear who had the right to make the final call on the game's decisions. I had only been with the company for 2 years by then, so everyone on my team either had the same seniority as me or more, which made things more difficult. So I had to ask some people very nicely if they could help, and tell others to assertively do as they say. That's how we completed Clock Tower. There was one member of the development team who was particularly defiant. They would openly say, "This game is boring." But the moment the game came out and was released to critical acclaim, they started saying, "I worked on this."
I think the online gaming publication The Avocado summed up very well how important but nearly overlooked the impact of Clock Tower is.
Human Entertainment's Hifumei Kono punched above the low-budget studio's weight with the Super Famicom's highly atmospheric Clock Tower, pioneering the survival horror genre a year before Resident Evil popularized it. But subsequent series entries were unable to recapture the first game's lightning in a bottle. Relatively strong commercial performance by the series' second title, and its belated localization outside of Japan, failed to prevent Human Entertainment's 1999 bankruptcy. Neither a handful of attempts at the revival throughout the 2000s by Sunsoft and Capcom, including the cult classic Demento Haunting Ground, nor Hifumei Kono's crowdfunded 2016 spiritual successor could revive the series. It seems that Clock Tower's time in the spotlight has fully come and gone.
But this is only partly true. While Clock Tower is not a popular household name except among the devoted, deep-cut survival horror enthusiasts, it's highly likely that Resident Evil 2's Mr. X and Resident Evil 3's Nemesis a couple years later would probably only exist because of Scissor Man, and some of the best survival horror or stalker games ever made, like Amnesia: The Dark Descent, Outlast, Alien Isolation, and even the recent Dead by Daylight, all have within themselves a core indebtedness to the hide-and-seek innovations of Clock Tower. At the risk of sounding arrogant, even Kono himself admits that Clock Tower was epoch-making. Clockmaker also makes epochs, apparently. Epoch simply means the beginning of a period in the history of someone or something, implying that something major has changed and that everything after it is part of or likely inspired by said epoch maker. And while Kono was certainly walking in the giant footsteps of Rex from 3D Monster Maze or the gothic Lovecraftian tropes of Alone in the Dark, he can rightly lay claim to many of the innovations that survival horror would emulate more and more as the years wore on. I'd even say that the recent fad of hide-and-seek horror games skipped a couple generations as a response to the action-heavy focus of Resident Evil 4 onwards. And that staying power really sticks out to me, the ability to essentially travel through time with your work, the mark of timeless art. I guess it really does just take some time to cause adherence, after all. Thanks for watching. And before we go, I want to wish you all a very happy Halloween 2025 and wish Hifumei Kono and Human a happy 30th birthday for Clock Tower. Credit for this video in the first place really goes to SUX Films and one other person that I can't quite remember or find where they requested it. It's probably in some comment buried in some video somewhere, but I know I had 2 people requesting it according to my chart that I have. So this goes out to you guys. Thanks so much for inclining my ear towards it. So if you like this video, you owe those 2 folks the most. I, of course, have to give a very big thank you to our very own Hifumei Kono and Void Retro, who did an excellent job bringing him to life. He's a great horror and RPG YouTuber whom you must hammer those like and subscribe buttons for, and go check out some of his work like his profoundly in-depth Silent Hill F review he just made. And many thanks to Arkham666, who lent his dulcet tones to this video. If you'd like to hear more, and especially about the topics that we care about on this channel like survival horror and RPGs, he's your guy. Baldy. Baby, thanks so much for voicing the indeterminate glob that was this avocado article that credited no one, so you've given voice to the voiceless. And while you're at it, check out some of his music and his other eclectic ramblings at your leisure. It will become your pleasure. And a great big thank you to Oren from Oranalysis, who stepped in last minute to help me get one line recorded, and who makes his cameo debut here. If you like Japanese horror movies and Japanese horror video games, there is no one I found more dedicated than Oren, so check him out. Also make sure you check out Ruby Ranger, who's recently gone ad-free to stick it to the man, and whom you can now sign up for as little as $1 a month to support his abiding and in-depth love of FPS documentaries, often the scary variety that we like here. He's also who gave me the idea to start my own $1 tier on Patreon and YouTube, where you can support the channel and keep it going full-time and get behind-the-scene updates on what's to come. Please consider becoming a patron or a channel member. By doing so, you'll be shouted out in the credits of every video, get early access to new videos, receive game keys as available, and even be able to vote on or contribute to upcoming projects. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, these people thought so, and I have to thank them for their generous support. Starting with Mark Neubauer, Deadforge, Hey Blondie, Yak Show, Bibby F. and Bloxburg, Melancholy Geek, and Luke Dudney. Thanks for signing on. I really appreciate it. And an extra special shout out to James Wyatt and the Nth Review for contributing to my highest tiers. And if you're not tired of me by now, go ahead and check me out in the Quad Damage podcast, where I'm joined by Deadforge and Robert Yap as we talk first-person games with developers, gaming personalities, and content creators alike. God bless you, everyone, and I'll see you soon.